And then also we have our guest speaker today, Dorje Gurung, who is a Adriatic College graduate of the class of 1990. And Dorje is from Nepal, and I'll read a bit of his bio just to give a brief introduction onto the work that he's done and where he comes from. And I'm sure that some of you were actively involved in the campaign that got him out of jail a couple of years ago. And so we're really excited to have him with us and also to just learn about his trajectory and the things that he does now. So I'll just a quick overview of his work. So Dorje graduated, like I said, from UWC Adriatic and has been an IB chemistry teacher at Lipochan, Red Cross Nordic, and at UWC USA, and also at Adriatic College. We look forward to really hearing from his great journey tonight. And then just a short overview. He journeyed from the barren high-altitude desert of Mustang to Kathmandu for his primary and second education, then to Italy for his high school diploma, then to the US for his undergraduate degree, and finally to Australia for his teaching degree. Following his studies, Dorje pursued a career as international school science teacher, teaching in 10 different countries for over 15 years. During that time, Dorje also traveled extensively before he returned to Nepal in May 2013 for his last teaching position in Doha, Qatar. Before Dorje returned to Nepal to contribute to the education of children from socioeconomic backgrounds similar to his, he was arrested in Doha for allegedly insulting Islam. He was unjustly imprisoned. So, we welcome Dorje to tell us his story.
Thanks, Jose, and thanks, Megan, for arranging all of this. I've been introduced, so I'm not going to go back into saying who I am and so on. But as Jose mentioned, I'm a teacher by qualification, but 3 years ago I quit teaching and went back to Nepal to do social work. And as Jose also mentioned, there was an incident in Qatar, and then everything else that happened. And then before that, long before the incident in Qatar, everything that happened to me was a result of basically education. Education essentially freed me twice in my life. Firstly, from the shackles of poverty in Nepal, and from the birth of low socioeconomic background in Nepal. And secondly, from a potential 7-year jail sentence in Qatar. And it's because education changed my life so dramatically that I have returned to Nepal since that incident in Qatar to do the work that I do, to be a social worker, and have been involved in the education of the next generation of Nepalese from also marginalized backgrounds. And this presentation is all about how that all came about and the details of the work that I do in Nepal. All right. I'm from the little district of Mustang, a desolate highland desert, as Jose mentioned. Desolate, barren highland desert along the northern Nepal-Tibet border. It's the little section inside the blue circle. And as a child, I lived in this in a little village in this district called Tangbe with my grandparents, which is not actually unusual in Nepal, especially with poor families. Like most remote villages in our country, and at the time we had no roads, no schools, no electricity, no indoor plumbing, etc. And being born a Tibeto-Nepalese in Nepal, I'm considered a low caste in the Hindu caste system. My family was also poor. So, let alone graduate from high school, let alone forget about college, forget about a professional career, forget about accomplishing all that I have accomplished so far to bring me in front of you here today, I wasn't even expected to go to school. I was not even expected to make much of life because of the context of my birth, because of my low caste Tibeto-Nepalese and birth in poor family. But my parents, even with no history of education themselves, they wanted me to go to school. And they lived in this little town, this amazing town called Pokhara. And they wanted me to come live with them so that they could send me to school to learn to read and write. Reluctantly, my grandfather dropped me off in Pokhara, where for the duration he was there, he would piggyback me to and from school. Living conditions in Pokhara were not much better. There were 5 of us in a single room, my parents, 2 younger brothers, and myself. We lived in, and the single room had but 1 bed. Unable to even afford a second bed, every evening my mom would lay down a small carpet, a pillow, and a blanket for my brother and myself to sleep on, while my parents and my baby brother slept on the bed itself. And we also moved often. Every time I moved, I changed school. I was attending government schools that had next to nothing in terms of resources and funding, but at least I was in school. A teacher at the 3rd school, this school, Bal Jyoti Primary School, probably made the biggest difference in my life. Realizing that I had potential, this teacher took my dad aside and told him, "Your son has potential, but if you leave him here, nothing will become of that. Take him to Kathmandu and put him in a good school." Heeding his advice, my father took me to Kathmandu, and the capital city, and to make a long story short, I ended up at St. Xavier's Godavari School, the Jesuit school in Nepal, and at the time probably the best elementary school in the country. At St. Xavier's, I was encouraged and inspired by North American teachers to dream. My 5th grade teacher, Father Downing from Cincinnati, Ohio, was one of them. And one of the things he would do was to bring former students to our class to talk to us about their lives. And many of them either graduates of or students at colleges and universities here in the U.S. As a result, as a 5th grader, I also dreamt of coming to the U.S. for further studies. Firstly, to get my family out of poverty, and secondly, to help children from backgrounds like mine, backgrounds similar to mine. At the time, in 1981, when I was a 5th grader, my family had a living arrangement where we rented 2 rooms in a big 3-story house. We were one of a number of tenants in the house. We had no refrigerator, no phones, no indoor plumbing, no indoor bathrooms, etc. The most sophisticated electronic gadget we owned was a small mono boombox. The biggest factory manufactured mechanical device we owned was an old Indian Atlas bicycle. At the time, in my family, we were anywhere from 7 to 10 members. We'd already added 2 more members to my family. They included my parents, my 4 younger brothers by then, and other cousins and visiting relatives. We had 3 beds in a small bedroom for all of us. And there I was, dreaming of coming to the U.S. But as the firstborn in the family, As a firstborn in a poor family, however, I was under constant pressure to quit school and to work to support my family financially. Furthermore, because I was a Tibeto-Nepalese, a low caste, as I mentioned earlier, as I was growing up, our society constantly reinforced its belief that I would amount to nothing, regardless of the efforts I put into anything I did. In spite of all that, stubbornly, I stayed on in school, nurturing my dream. So when I completed high school, I became the first person in my entire extended family of over 50 people, including first cousins, to do so. Then, in 1988, when I received a full scholarship to the United World College of the Adriatic, I was the first person from my community to go west, to come west for studies, to go to Europe for studies. Towards the end of my UWC experience, I finally realized my dream of coming to the US and ended up at Grinnell College, also with, again, pretty much 100% scholarship. Spring of 1994. Approaching graduation, I knew what I wanted to do, and it wasn't to return to Nepal. Not immediately, anyway. One late afternoon, watching the late afternoon sun, the late afternoon sky turning different hues every several seconds, my friend Aubrey had asked, "So, what do you want to do?" And I told her, "I want to go see the world." But the trouble was, I had no idea how. When I graduated from Grinnell, I became the first person from my village and probably from the whole of Upper Mustang to get tertiary qualification from an educational institution in the West. And soon after graduation, as luck would have it, my former chemistry teacher at the UWC AD invited me back to teach. I jumped at the opportunity, and between 1994 and 2013, I pursued a fantastic international career of teaching, traveling, and exploring the world. By the time I quit teaching, I'd worked in 10 different countries and traveled to about 36 more, and my network of friends spanned the whole globe. I studied, worked with, and taught some amazing people. And I saw and did things that I'd never imagined doing growing up in Nepal. And in the process, learned a great deal about this incredible world and its people. I'd trekked to an altitude as high as 17,000 feet in Nepal, and scuba dived to a depth of 31 meters in the Philippines. I'd swum with wild dolphins off the coast of Zanzibar. I'd skied in the Swiss Alps, in a number of places in the US, including Taos in New Mexico, in Godari, Georgia. I'd snow camped in Norway, hiked in the Dolomites in Italy. I'd gone hot air ballooning in Australia, and had gone on wildlife safaris in Nepal, in Zambia, and the awesome Ngorongoro crater and the incomparable Serengeti plains in Tanzania. I'd learned to play the didgeridoo, ultimate frisbee, and to dance salsa and merengue. All the while, as I was exploring and learning about the world at large, I'd been planning to return home, to fulfill my original dream of helping the next generation of youngsters born into the kind of socioeconomic context I had been born into. The only question had always been, when? In August 2011, my international teaching career took me to Qatar in the Arabian Peninsula. After a year of teaching at Qatar Academy, I started contemplating seriously about returning home. Then, in March 2013, I finally decided to go home at the end of that academic year, which would have been at the end of June. But as you all know, I ended up taking a small detour. On May 1st, I was thrown in jail for allegedly insulting Islam. Again, as you all already know, as Jose also mentioned, and as you also already know, luckily for me, friends from all over the world, many of them UWCers like yourselves, came to my rescue. They initiated a worldwide campaign asking the Qatari government to respect my right to due process or to release me on human rights grounds. The campaign got so big, as a matter of fact, that I was released. I returned home on May 13 after spending 12 days in jail. I know for a fact that had I not been educated in as many countries as I have been, and had I not been an international teacher, I would not have had the kind of network of friends to get me out of prison. I met a number of Nepalese migrant workers in jail, semi and unskilled migrant workers, some of whom had also been locked up on trumped-up charges. While education and what followed got me out, it was lack of education, which, firstly, was responsible for them ending up in Qatar to begin with as a migrant laborer, and secondly, lack of education was responsible for getting them stuck in jail with no one from outside coming to their aid. In other words, had it not been for my education, I would not have had the social capital that I do to get me out, to get me not just out of jail, but to get me where I am today. Since returning to Nepal on May 13, 2013, I've been doing what I can, both through Committed, the organization I run with my buddy, who I go all the way back to second grade, J.G. Bhara, and at times also independently to contribute to the education of marginalized Nepalese, something, as I mentioned earlier, that I had been wanting to do, that I told myself I would do ultimately. Committed implements education-related projects. We help public and community schools where vulnerable children from low socioeconomic backgrounds attend, schools similar to the ones that I started my own academic career at. Schools where quality of education, as I intimated earlier, is extremely poor. Our organization helps them with resources and funding to try to ensure children from marginalized groups have a shot at a better life than their parents. We work in a small village called Thangpalkot, northeast of Kathmandu. Even though the village, inhabited mostly by the marginalized ethnic group Tamang, and also about only 60 miles from Kathmandu, accessibility is an issue. Here's a short video clip of the last 16 miles of rural road to the village taken on my first visit the summer of 2012.
ये जो मकई अरू चाहिँ भर्खरै रोपेको होला
यताको पहेँलो चाहिँ फेरि भर्खर उताको पहेँलो Taking a four-wheel drive to the village is a luxury. Jay-Z, my friend and executive director, committed, and I normally walk for a number of reasons. For one, SUV rental, such as that in the video, is quite expensive. And for another, both of us enjoy walking in the Nepalese countryside. As you could tell, it's amazing. We only rent when we're transporting goods and materials. But walking the last 16 miles means that it takes about 10 hours to reach the village from our homes in Kathmandu. And the following video, okay, I'll come over and do that, yeah. It's not on the PowerPoint for some. Oh, maybe. Oh, okay. Maybe it will play. Okay, all right. So the following video, is one of the schools we work with, and it'll give you an idea of what public schools in rural Nepal look like. And this video was made more than 2 years ago to woo potential donors to my fundraising drive. So just ignore the references to the drive.
I want to be a policeman.
I want to be an engineer.
I want to be a doctor. I want to be a nurse. I want to be a teacher. I want to be
We're here in Sindapalchok at the school that you're supporting. You've just heard the dreams and aspirations of the students. But there's a huge gap between their dreams and reality. The reality is that the school doesn't have enough classrooms. For instance, this particular classroom, they have had to put 2 different classes together. And right now, there are over 50 students in here. The other issue, the other challenge here is the quality of teaching. Although the teachers themselves are highly committed, they lack experience and they lack training to help the students realize their dreams. I'm incredibly grateful for the support that you provided me thus far. I need one final push to get us past the tipping point, to help the children of Sindapalchok achieve their dreams. Unfortunately, for most children in Nepal, such a school as Raithane is the only option. Consequently, a vast majority of Nepalese students struggle to even graduate from elementary school. Forget high school, forget college, forget everything else. As you can see, less than a fourth of the population have elementary school education. This is based on the 2011 census report. Much less than a tenth of the population have school leaving certificate, which is essentially a high school diploma. Students take their SLC, as we call them, examinations after their 10th grade. Here's some statistics about the 2014 examinations. Notice the pass rate for private school students at 93% is considerably higher than the 28% pass rate for students attending government or public schools. But the number of candidates from government schools at roughly 400,000 is more than twice the number of candidates from private schools. And almost 300,000 failed the examination. What's more, the dropout rate at government schools is considerably higher. To give you some perspective on that, here's what the education level of the U.S. population was for 2012. A little different. There are a number of reasons for the poor level of education of the population of Nepal. One of the main reasons is that the education system is very, very corrupt, leading to public schools being severely underfunded and under-resourced. It's rare for a public school to have even enough teachers and classrooms, as you saw. Forget the rest. To improve the quality of education, Committed has implemented a number of projects at our schools. Raithane School, the video that you saw of, Raithane School, the school that was featured in the video earlier, we had helped with building a computer lab, funding a library, funding a science lab. We'd also helped them fund the construction of the newest building as well as the construction of a multi-purpose court, the renovation of bathrooms and drinking water fountains to address wash issues, etc. To make education sustainable, we had also started a social business for education project, a fishery. The fishery, was to have been a holistic development project. Here's a video describing why and how.
What do fish, science lessons, and the tallest mountains in the world have in common? We at Committed believe they are the ingredients for a sustainable and holistic poverty alleviation program. Committed is a non-profit, community-led organization based in Nepal. We work in Thangpalkot, a village in the foothills of the Himalayas, which, like most in the country, suffers from two interconnected problems: a lack of high-quality education and shortage of income generation opportunities. Our project addresses both these issues through a social business model of improvement in education and poverty alleviation. We have built fisheries for 2 schools and have supported community members to build their own. The income generated has provided much-needed funds for the schools and families. The fisheries attached to the school also function as a laboratory to do hands-on science, bringing the curriculum to life, in addition to teaching the students practical life skills. The income the farmers generate from the fishery has helped them to increase their income by moving to cash crops from their traditional subsistence farming. This community-led model of poverty alleviation through social businesses is both replicable and empowering. For us, teach a man to fish and he feeds himself for life is not just a well-worn slogan, but literally what we are all about.
But then, as you know, the earthquake struck on April 25th and May 12 last year. The calamity completely destroyed 5,000 schools in the country and damaged 16,000 schools, which is almost half of all the schools in the country. The education of 1 million or 2.5 million students, depending on the source, were directly affected. Oh, hold on. Yeah, that's good. Directly affected. The recent political agitations in the Southern Plains and the economic embargo, some of you might have heard about, further affected the education of another 1.5 million students. The community of Tangpalkot and schools in the village suffered considerable destruction as well. 45 villagers died, and 594 of the 600 houses were destroyed. 34 of the 50 classrooms in the 5 schools Committed works with were destroyed, disrupting the education of roughly 900 students in the community. Here are some before and after images of the schools. The first one is that of Raithani School. The collapsed building housed the computer lab, the library, and the science lab. And this is Taltulisuri Elementary School, one of the other 5 schools. Committed funded a small library for the school in addition to sponsoring the education of a few students. The library was completely destroyed. This one is the library, way on the left. The second one from the left used to house the library. And this was the staff room. And this one is the little elementary school of Satkanya. Only recently, we'd also helped Satkanya set up a small library, which, as you can see, got destroyed by the earthquake. It was the same with Kumbesori School. This building housed the library which Committed funded. Apart from working with Committed on these projects, on my own, I've been involved in the UWC National Committee. I'm not only involved in the selection process, I've also done outreach work, especially at public schools where children from poor families go, and have run fundraising campaigns. In 2014, I was able to raise enough funds to send Iju to UWC Maastricht. A young student whose family couldn't even afford the ticket and the pocket money, which the financial assistance, which the scholarship didn't cover. As a consequence of all those destructions, Committed has had to take a few steps back as a result. Since the earthquake, we've provided emergency relief to the villagers. We've helped set up what we call temporary learning centers and have created and run educational programs at the TLCs. TLCs are basic structures made up mostly of corrugated iron sheets. We conduct music lessons, sports activities, reading and writing programs we call Star Reader and Star Writer programs, about which you can read in my blog. We've also begun reconstruction of the schools, starting with Taltulisori School. However, we only have the funds to partially reconstruct Taltulisori Primary School. We're still fundraising to fund the reconstruction of the other schools. Part of the reason for my staying on in the U.S. is to promote our work and raise more funds for that very purpose. If we are to rebuild the schools, we'll need considerably more funds. In doing all this for these schools and children of Nepal, we hope to give these children what I have gotten. Just as education has been a source of freedom for me, freedom from the shackles of poverty, freedom from a potential 7-year jail sentence, I believe it will be so for them as well. My hope is that education gives them the freedom to dream, the freedom to chart their own destinies just as I have been able, and possibly live the kind of dignified life I've had the privilege of living and continue to live. Thank you. And if you need more information, there you go. And we've got time for question and answers.